My name is Lydia Brooks. I'm 62, and I spent 30 years running a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Tonight at my Thanksgiving table, I did something mothers aren't supposed to do. I ended the Bank of Mom. With my phone under the napkin, I messaged my bank to revoke every authorized user card tied to my accounts. The joint checking with my son Connor was frozen, and any co-signed credit tied to my name was suspended. Effective immediately, Madeline kept slicing turkey. Connor checked a football score, and Jenna asked who wanted more gravy. They chatted about Black Friday deals while I watched the confirmations roll in. In 6 hours, when the systems updated overnight, the plastic they treated like magic would start spitting out declines. I lifted my water glass and smiled like a hostess. You can call it cruel. I call it a boundary finally enforced. I built those accounts, not a committee of adults. Respect follows responsibility. And I was really done financing people who confused love with access. Tell me when the bill comes due at dawn. Is the villain the woman who pays her own way, or the children who expected me to keep paying theirs? Madeline was the first to break the calm. She set down her fork, looked straight at me, and said, "Mom, stop begging for money. It's embarrassing." The room froze, no clinking cutlery, no whispers from the kids at the far end of the table. Even Connor looked up from his phone, as if he'd realized the air had shifted. I smiled. The way you do when you're deciding whether to fight or walk away. "Begging?" I asked softly. "I thought I was reminding you of the $15,000 you promised to repay by Christmas." Madeline rolled her eyes. Connor leaned back in his chair, and Jenna let out a small laugh. The kind that says they've discussed me behind my back. Apparently, a mother asking for repayment was now a social offense. Connor chimed in that it was tacky to talk about money at dinner, and Jenna added that families share, as if that erased 3 years of unpaid loans. I watched them justify themselves like adults, rehearsing excuses for children. My pulse slowed. Not from shock, but from a kind of awakening. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled wider, picked up my phone, and said, "You're right. Sweetheart, I should stop begging. When the system updates in 6 hours, I thought, they'll finally learn what silence costs." By sunrise, my phone was vibrating across the nightstand like it had a heartbeat of its own. 15 missed calls, 8 texts, all carrying the same panic in different tones. Madeline wrote first her card declined at Target. Something must be wrong with the bank. Connor's message came next. Angry in all caps, demanding to know why the joint business account was frozen. I brewed coffee and took my time buttering a croissant. Jenna's text was the most dramatic. "Mom, this is really childish. You're ruining our credit." The irony almost made me laugh out loud. I'd spent years rescuing their credit scores while eating soup from cans to stretch my pension. And now, I was the one ruining something. The sun spilled through the blinds, and for the first time in months, I felt awake. By 8:30, the group chat was chaos accusations, question marks, guilt dressed as concern. I didn't respond to a single word. I finished my breakfast, took a long shower, and poured myself a second cup of coffee in a real glass mug. Not the chipped one I usually used. They thought this was a mistake, a glitch to be fixed by lunchtime. But it wasn't. It was the correction of a system they had built on entitlement, and I was finally the one pushing the reset button. By 10:15, I saw Madeline pacing on my porch through the peephole, her coat half-zipped, her face blotchy from crying. She knocked again and again until I opened the door, smiling like it was any ordinary morning. "Good morning, sweetheart." I said. "You're up early for a holiday." Her voice shook as she demanded to know what I'd done, insisting the bank made a mistake. I offered her coffee instead of an explanation. She refused the cup, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Mom?" Mark had to leave a full cart at the store. "The kids don't understand why their Christmas gifts are gone." I stirred my coffee and asked if she'd tried paying with her own money. The silence that followed said everything. I reminded her the accounts were for emergencies, not for funding weekend trips to Chicago or new handbags she'd needed for work. Her jaw clenched, and she whispered that I couldn't be serious. I told her I was completely. When she accused me of turning my back on family, I set the mug down and said calmly, "When you're ready to talk like an adult about repayment, call and schedule an appointment." Then I closed the door and locked it. That night, I pulled every bank statement from the drawer in my study and stacked them across the kitchen table. 18 months of transfers, withdrawals, and credit card charges stared back at me in neat, unforgiving rows. I circled each transaction that wasn't mine, yellow highlighter bleeding through the thin paper. By the third page, a pattern emerged: consistent online purchases, small but steady, all traced to one specific card number. I checked my account list. That card had been canceled more than a year ago. My stomach dropped. Someone had been using the old number without authorization. And the trail led straight to Jenna. Gas stations, restaurants, subscription services, even late-night deliveries in her neighborhood. It was all right there in black and white. I'd taught my children to be honest. But this wasn't a mistake. It was theft hiding behind family ties. When I called Jenna, her voice trembled with denial before slipping into excuses. She said her job didn't pay enough, that she only used it for essentials. Essentials apparently included a new designer coat and takeout from restaurants I couldn't afford on my pension. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her what she already knew, that using someone's card without permission was fraud, no matter the surname attached to it. After the call ended, I sat alone at the table, surrounded by evidence and silence. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was done being naive. Tomorrow, I would stop thinking like a mother and start thinking like a creditor. Connor called it a family meeting, as if rebranding an ambush made it civil. When I arrived at Madeline's house, they were already seated like a panel of experts evaluating my sanity. Connor spoke first. Using his smooth office tone, he said they were worried about me, that I hadn't been myself since Dad died. The implication was clear: I was too emotional to manage my own decisions. Madeline nodded along, pretending concern, and Jenna looked down at her hands. The picture of guilt in a sweater she probably bought with my canceled card. They said I'd always been generous, that this behavior was unlike me. I let them finish every sentence before setting my folder on the table. Inside were printed copies of text messages, all in their own words, promising repayment by dates that had long passed. I read them aloud, one by one, watching the color drain from their faces. If it wasn't a debt, I asked quietly, "Why did you all promise to pay it back?" Connor muttered, something about family, helping family. But no one met my eyes. I gathered the papers, smoothed them into a neat pile, and stood. They thought this was a breakdown. I thought it was the first time I'd finally stood up straight. The following Monday, I met with Amanda Ruiz, a civil attorney recommended by a friend from my bridge club. She listened quietly as I laid out the timeline: every transfer, every promise, every excuse. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something that made me feel lighter than I had in months. "You're not being dramatic, Mrs. Brooks. You're being defrauded." Amanda explained my options with crisp precision. Step 1. Issue formal demand letters to each child, giving them 90 days to respond with a payment plan. Step 2. Calculate interest at 6% from the original loan dates. Step 3. Include a clause allowing wage garnishment or property liens if they defaulted. It was the kind of clarity I'd been craving. That afternoon, Amanda's assistant printed 3 certified letters, each sealed with my signature. I watched the envelopes disappear into the outgoing mail bin like tiny declarations of independence. There was no anger left. Only relief. For years, my generosity had been mistaken for weakness. But now, with legal ink drying on my side, I realized something profound. This wasn't revenge, it was the reestablishment of order. And I had finally hired the right enforcer. 2 weeks after the letters went out, I received a call that made my stomach twist. The voice on the other end belonged to Caroline Pierce, my late husband Gregory's former business partner. She sounded hesitant. The way people do when they're not sure if they're about to ruin your day or save it. She said my son Connor had contacted her a few weeks earlier, asking about Gregory's old business accounts. At first, I thought she must have misheard. Connor had never worked a day in Gregory's company, and any accounts tied to it should have been closed after his death. Caroline explained that he'd asked if there were any funds left unclaimed or accounts that might still be active. That phrasing, so clinical, so deliberate, sent a chill through me. I thanked her, hung up, and drove straight to the bank. The manager confirmed my suspicion. Gregory had maintained a small consulting account that had gone dormant after his passing, holding a balance of $34,000. The bank had been trying to contact the estate for years, sending letters to an old office address. When I asked if anyone else had inquired, he hesitated before admitting it. Yes. Connor had tried to claim the funds. Pretending to be the executor, I left the bank with shaking hands and a single thought pulsing behind my calm expression. My son hadn't just borrowed from me, he'd tried to steal from his father's grave. That evening, I called Connor before the fury could fade into disbelief. I told him I'd spoken with the bank and knew about his attempt to access Gregory's dormant account. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that stretches thin between guilt and panic. He started stammering about just checking and wanting to help settle Dad's affairs. But his voice betrayed him. I reminded him that impersonating an executor to claim $34,000 wasn't helping. It was fraud. The same kind of entitlement that had poisoned this family for years. Then I asked the question. He didn't expect why the transfers from his checking account matched rent payments for an apartment in another woman's name. Silence again. Deeper this time, Connor finally muttered that it was complicated, which told me everything I needed to know. 2 nights later, I gathered all 3 of them at my dining table. I laid down Amanda Ruiz's demand pack like a deck of cards. Every page notarized and time-stamped. The total owed was $55,400, principal and unauthorized charges combined, accruing interest at 6% until paid in full. Payment plans were drafted, wage garnishment clauses attached, and signatures required. When Connor tried to protest, I met his eyes and smiled. You called this family business, didn't you? Then let's treat it like one. A week after the confrontation, I decided to organize Gregory's old paperwork, something I had avoided since his death. In the bottom drawer of his desk, tucked beneath tax forms and faded letters, I found a manila envelope marked in his handwriting, "For Lydia, open after my death." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The ink slightly smudged, but his tone unmistakably steady. He wrote about the consulting account I had just discovered, explaining that he'd kept it secret only because he feared he was developing memory problems like his father. He told Connor about the account as a safeguard, not a scheme. hoping someone would remember it if his mind failed. I never meant for him to claim it. Gregory wrote, "Only to make sure you got what's yours." The letter softened the edges of my anger, but it didn't erase the betrayal that followed. His closing line stopped me cold. "Don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness. You have every right to protect what's yours." Taped beneath the jewelry box in our bedroom, just where he said it would be, I found the key to a small safe deposit box at Second National. Inside were savings bonds totaling $15,000 and a short note for the strong, beautiful woman who always deserved honesty. I sat there for a long time, tears running freely, realizing that love and truth often arrive on separate days. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Amanda Ruiz sat beside me, calm as ever, while my 3 children filed in with their own attorney. A young man named Rodriguez, who looked like he'd drawn the short straw. Madeline wouldn't meet my eyes. Connor looked rehearsed, and Jenna's fingers wouldn't stop fidgeting. 4 months of avoidance had led to this, the day they finally faced the math they'd created. Amanda began with quiet authority, laying out the evidence like dominoes. Every message, email, and bank transfer was printed, highlighted, and dated. The total stood at $55,400, $53,000 in loans, plus $2,400 in unauthorized charges, interest at 6%, and legal fees to be calculated. Rodriguez cleared his throat and muttered something about family misunderstandings. But Amanda cut him off politely. Intentions don't erase paper trails. For 4 hours, we went line by line while they whispered, cried, and negotiated among themselves. When the final version of the agreement was ready, Amanda read each clause aloud: repayment schedules over 3 years, wage garnishment if they defaulted, liens if they tried to sell property, and immediate enforcement for any missed payment. The signatures came slowly, trembling but inevitable. When it was over, I gathered my copy of the contract and stood. "This isn't punishment," I told them quietly. "It's the cost of accountability." For the first time, none of them argued. The only sound left in the room was the click of Amanda's pen, closing a small, perfect period at the end of a very long sentence. By May, the first automatic payments began arriving in my account, like clockwork. Madeline's transfer came on the 15th, Connor's on the 20th, Jenna's on the 25th. Each one was precise down to the cent, like a rhythm only discipline could play. It was astonishing how responsible people become when accountability is built into their paychecks. With the money flowing back, I made changes that had nothing to do with revenge. I sold the old house too big, too full of ghosts, and moved into a quiet senior community outside Columbus. My mornings were for gardening, my afternoons for bridge, and my nights for reading novels I'd never had time to finish. For the first time in years, I slept without that knot in my chest. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent decades teaching others how to manage systems, yet it took a legal document to teach my own children respect. They'd once accused me of being controlling. Now they were learning that boundaries aren't control. Their structure. Every payment was a reminder not of debt, but of a new order where I finally came first. It turns out, respect can be taught. It just requires a firm syllabus and a monthly reminder from payroll. 2 years later, the payments were nearly complete when I got a call from Madeline. Her voice was steady, careful, the kind that carries rehearsed sincerity. She said the 3 of them wanted to take me to dinner, no agenda, no favors, just a meal they would pay for. I hesitated long enough to make her wonder if I'd say no, then agreed to Saturday at 7. The restaurant was elegant but quiet, a place where conversations stayed contained between candlelight and wine glasses. Madeline started by saying they wanted to apologize without conditions. Connor admitted the payment plan had taught him more about discipline than any job ever had. Jenna talked about paying her own rent and how it felt good to earn something instead of asking for it. I listened, not as a judge, but as someone who'd already rendered the verdict. When the check came, Connor reached for it, and all three insisted on splitting it equally. No one argued, no one flinched, and no one asked if I wanted dessert. It wasn't a tearful reunion or a grand redemption arc. It was something smaller and more honest, a quiet acknowledgement that respect had finally replaced entitlement. And that was enough for me. After that dinner, I made my expectations clear. Our peace would exist only within boundaries. No borrowing, no shared accounts, no favors dressed up as emergencies. We would meet when it was scheduled, not when someone needed something. The rules were written, and this time, I wasn't bending a single one. Each of them understood the stakes because the contract still stood. Any missed payment or financial request would reactivate the legal clauses Amanda had drafted. They knew I would enforce them without hesitation, not out of cruelty, but out of principle. Love, after all, can't exist without respect, and respect doesn't survive without consequences. Now, when they visit, they bring stories instead of problems. They hug me at the door, not because they need to, but because they want to. The woman they once dismissed as controlling has become the standard they measure themselves against. I'm not their safety net anymore. I'm the example of what accountability looks like. Some people would call me heartless for taking things this far. Maybe they're right. Or maybe they've never been robbed of dignity by the people they raised. Either way, I sleep soundly, knowing this no one walks away from my lessons unchanged. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you carry a story of your own, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. Always.